The original pastor of Emmaus, Dominic Doan, he was pastoring a church in Hawaii, and he really felt like he was being called to plant a church. He took a hike on a volcano, and he really felt the Lord telling him to plant a church in Raleigh, North Carolina. He got a hold of his friends back in Portland, Oregon, that he went to ministry school with, and said, "This is what I feel like God's calling me to do." We would have these prayer meetings, and during these meetings, just get to know these people, these men and women, and even some of the families with kids, because we were going to go move across the country together. But we would also do research on Raleigh and do research on this area and of the city and the state that none of us really had any knowledge of and had never been or visited. And so we would learn about this state and the city that we were going to come plant a church in, but then we would also pray, and we had a heart for the young adults and the college ministry, because there's so many colleges in such a small area in the triangle. But we continued to look for a space, and there really wasn't any available in Raleigh that we could afford. Our first service was on September 8th, 2013, and it was in the Arts Center. Shortly after that, Dominic was asked to come back to Oregon to be the lead pastor of Westside, the church that planted us. When we first moved out here, our community group, we got together and we broke up into groups of like 3 or 4, and we met at the Capitol building. And from the Capitol building, we all took parts of downtown, and we just agreed to be led by the Spirit, but just pray for the buildings, pray for the businesses.
In the summer of 2014, my family and I had the opportunity to come and move from the West Coast to Raleigh, North Carolina, where we lived for the 5 years that we were privileged to be the pastors at Emmaus. And during that time, I think there was this sense that God had a place for us to be as a church community, a place where we could invest in a neighborhood, do good for a people group. And during that time, we just prayed as a church multiple times over the 5 years that God would just open a door. We've been given this beautiful art center in Cary, North Carolina, but really felt that God had a neighborhood and a people for us to reach.
Just the overall vision and the opportunity, if you will, to be able to now take Emmaus and the DNA that's there and the vision that's there and go downtown Raleigh. It just feels like a right fit for me as someone who's super new to the Emmaus story.
Pilot Baptist Church history began in 1898, when in June of that year, Williamson family, which I think was affiliated with the Pilot Mill, textile mill, wanted to donate some land for a church to be established at 1012 North Blunt Street in Raleigh. So they sold the original land for $1 in June of 1898. History was that the area was a mill village. People that worked at the mill lived across the street from the church. In 1951, our former pastor, Wesley Enzer, came. God used him mightily to be a minister in that community. At one time, I think the church grew to about 350 or 400 people during the 50s. Our pastor served there almost 50 years, and I've been there 20. And I think the average tenure for a pastor now is 3 to 7 years.
I was born and raised in Raleigh, and my home church growing up was Pilot Baptist Church. Pilot has labored there so faithfully for so many years and have done prayer walks in the community and have really opened their hearts and their ears to hear what God has for them and just to want to be faithful.
What a wonderful ministry we had with the children across the street at Halifax Court. And as he said, it was a low-income housing. We could have anywhere between 12 on the low end, and sometimes as many as 30 to 40 of those little boys, mostly little boys.
My family faithfully every Sunday evening would open the doors and invite all of those kids in, and we would play games, we would play kickball, and we would have snacks, and we would hear about God.
So how many of y'all live with your fathers? There were about 30 of them there that night, and not a single hand went up. It was just a way for us to love on them, and they were always wanted a hug.
And just provide a place for them that was consistent and safe no matter what else was going on for them at home.
We struggle with things like, well, Pastor, why don't we just sell the church? Why, what's wrong with just selling the church? And our question was, well, what do you do with the money then? We're not trying to put money in our pockets and walk away. This is God's thing. This is what God did. And we want him to continue to do it. What a blessing it was for us as well to step into facilities that were paid for. I mean, granted, they need work, but, to be handed those facilities and God saying, here, this is for you and this is where I want you, so.
And just to think of all the people around that church, the people right across the street, the people in the where Halifax Court used to be, which is half low income and half regular income, and then all of Mordecai that's behind the church there. It's a wonderful mission field, and to know that y'all have a heart for that neighborhood.
Our hope is it will continue to be a church for many more years. I would love it when I draw my last breath to be able to say, there's still a church at 1012 North Blunt Street in Raleigh.
We should be praying, Lord, how do you want me to participate in this? Use my giftings to bless this neighborhood. What have you given me that I can give back? Because you have given us something that we could not have done on our own.
That God would give us a place in an urban setting, in a neighborhood where a lot of our people already live and work and play and are doing ministry or living their lives for the gospel. And just to see that and to start to think big thoughts and pray big prayers towards, well, God, what do you have for us as a church? What do you have for us as individuals?
But I'm really excited to get to be a part of that and just to have that front row seat to watch God use us as a church family and to build on the shoulders of what Pilot's already done, the foundation that they've laid there. And I think that that's been the biggest thing on my heart as we would enter that building and just know that there have been many that have gone before who have heard his voice and who have been obedient, and we're a continuance of that. The story is so much bigger than us. It's God's story, and he's going to continue to do what he set out to accomplish.
I have been praying specifically over the last 2 years when we had Tuesday morning prayers every week. Lord, give us a building for free. I've heard of other churches that happens to other churches, so Lord, allow us to be bold enough to ask for a free building. And that's exactly what this is. This is a completely paid off building that has roots on an acre of land that we are being handed the keys to.
For 2 years on Tuesday mornings, we were getting together to pray for Emmaus, and it was during that period that I really had a sense that God was speaking to us about what was next. And little did I know this new door was going to open for us. But in one of those prayer times in April of 2018, I just felt the Lord say that he had for Emmaus to restore an old church. I wasn't even here to be part of that realization, but I was there to be able to pray for a church I didn't even know existed, that God was moving in them and in us to bring this partnership together.
Alex and Zoe, they used to live off King Charles Road, and they used to walk Hudson, their dog, on Blunt Street right there, and they would walk past Pilot, and they would pray for Pilot, and they would say, Lord, if it is your will, give us this building. And that was about 4 years ago.
And as I've been able to have this vantage point with multiple churches in our network, our family of churches, we've seen a lot of this transition where churches are basically passing the baton onto younger churches, startup churches, church plants. And so there's this really beautiful movement of one generation handing the baton off to the next generation. And so we with joy step in and honor what God has done in the past, and also with anticipation with what God has done now, handing and entrusting Emmaus with this opportunity to take forward a kingdom work.
It's just incredible to think that, like, here's this church, Pilot Baptist, who's been in this old part of North Raleigh, really the extreme part of North Raleigh when it was founded in that late 1800s. And just to think that there's this history that's been going for over 100 years of faithfulness by a church and by a people in the city of Raleigh. But then at the same time, you had this alternate storyline of Emmaus Church, who's existed for 6+ years. One in new life, the other is trying to hold on to some measure of life and heritage and history. And just to see those two things kind of like come together.
God is so good and so generous to have done this and to knit these two families together and to just use his purpose in it.
What a joy for me to be able to come and see what God has done in answer to the prayers that we prayed, and we wondered where those prayers went in the vastness of the kingdom, and to see now the culmination of all those prayers opening this great door.
We think through those pieces of this as God just kind of brought this opportunity up for Emmaus Church. It was just kind of like, God, could this really be what you're doing?
Yeah.
Could this really be what you're giving? Could this be the plan that you've had all along, not only for Pilot, not only for Emmaus, but even for us in our lives and our marriage? And just to think through that lens and start to see, like, God, it's just incredible. One of the biggest questions I know that we'll have about this whole thing is that people are feeling like, well, what's changed? We're having to change everything in Emmaus Church because now we're moving to downtown Raleigh versus downtown Cary. And I really believe in my heart of hearts that a lot is going to change, but then a lot is going to stay the same. And we're still going to be the same people in our own places of community. So it's not so much as we're changing as much as we're just adding to and continuing to walk in the faithfulness of God.
One of the great things about the kingdom of God is that it's never stagnant. So God is constantly moving his people and times and seasons. Nothing's permanent. We know that. Like, we're not going to be here forever. And as we transition as a church community, I know that transitions can be difficult. There's mixed emotions involved in going from one season to the next. But as God brings Emmaus forward into this next season, this is a time to be excited and hopeful, to believe that God's mission is being realized through transition. And as we realize that, we can with hope step into what we don't know, believing that God has already planned our steps ahead of time.
What does it seem like God would be doing? What is best for Emmaus? What is, trying to seek the Lord even in vision and purpose for what Emmaus came to do from Portland. What were the purposes? What were the things that we need to be obedient in as a church? Does this suit that? I think for me, I almost wanted to hold my emotion off to be like, I can't get excited about this. Like, this can't be it. Like, it can't be this obvious that God would connect this.
Never having a building set up, tear down, constantly be asking for space for this, reserve space for this, asking other churches, doing all this different hopscotch, if you will, to just do the day-to-day ministry. It's just going to be a great place to just have a center, a place that we can call home as Emmaus, that we can do ministry out of, that we can use for people that's ours, and just to be able to practice what we preach as far as place, but on the foundation of Pilot Baptist Church and the heritage that's already there, and just to have a leaping off point, if you will, to reach and engage the lost of Raleigh and bring God's kingdom to Raleigh as it is in heaven.